Hey everybody, please hit that red button for me and subscribe.
1,000 earlier.
Right.
All right, now let's go back a year, almost exactly a year, um, for the Battle of Stones River in late October of 1862. Braxton Bragg's army marched through the Cumberland Plateau of southeastern Kentucky and back into East Tennessee. He would move to Chattanooga and then push on to Murfreesboro. This was allowed by President Jefferson Davis, trying to free up Middle Tennessee. It's a vital location. The capital of Tennessee has a good railroad system. It's got some industry. We need the South needs Nashville back. In Jefferson Davis' words, we need Nashville, Tennessee. Um, Union General Don Carlos Buell had commanded the Army of the Ohio. It became the Army of the Cumberland at Perryville, but he would be replaced. He had refused to attack Bragg after Perryville. Bragg had retreated, but he offered not much resistance other than sending cavalry after him. Buell was replaced by William S. Rosecrans. Rosecrans had done some pretty good service before this, particularly around the Corinth area. The new Union commander took time to organize, train, and supply his army, um, but he was inundated with messages from Washington to act aggressively. Um, Earlier in December, the Union had suffered a horrible defeat at the Battle of Fredericksburg. The Emancipation Proclamation was set to take effect on January 1st, 1863, and Lincoln needed a victory. That's one reason that Lincoln is pushing so hard for Rosecrans to move and to act aggressively is he needs some validation. To validate the Emancipation Proclamation, he needs victories. And Burnside did not give him that. He gave him a horrible defeat. And so Lincoln needs a victory, and that's why he's pushing Rosecrans so hard. Rosecrans amassed about 40,000 of his, he has about 80,000 men in Nashville, but he only takes 40,000 with him towards Murfreesboro, which is where Bragg is. Bragg has about 35,000 men. So we're looking about 40,000 men versus 35,000 men. Bragg had lost a division. Carter Stevenson, Stevenson's division had been sent down to Vicksburg. Um, to to encourage the demoralized Army of Tennessee, President Jefferson Davis actually visits the troops. They're in Murfreesboro. Rosecrans will march on the day after Christmas. He marches in three columns down towards Murfreesboro from Nashville, and on December 29th, he parts of his army starts to arrive near where the Confederates are entrenched. They're slowed down by Confederate cavalry. Joseph Wheeler's cavalry is the only ones there. John Hunt Morgan has been sent into Kentucky, and Nathan Bedford Forrest has been sent into West Tennessee. And so the only cavalry that Bragg has available is Joseph Wheeler, and Wheeler does an excellent job of slowing down the Union army as it's marching towards Murfreesboro. Yeah, part of it's the cavalry, part of it is the weather. Rain and sleet and mud has slowed down the Union army more so than the cavalry did, but they did their part. They cut off supplies. They capture wagons full of ammunition and foodstuffs. They cause a lot of headache for Rosecrans as he's marching towards Murfreesboro. Now, once Rosecrans makes it to close to Murfreesboro, um, Bragg has fortified his position. He's actually got a well entrenched area. Honestly, all he has to do is sit and wait for Rosecrans to attack. That would probably be the best way to handle this. It's Rosecrans that's been ordered to attack. It's Rosecrans who is wanting to push Bragg out of Middle Tennessee. The best course of action would be simply to let Rosecrans attack, but that's not what happens. You was going to say something?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Somebody told me it almost resembled the Siegfried line the Germans had set up.
I can see that. Um, I mean, it was a pretty good defensive line. He had about 3 days to fortify the position that he was going to hold. Brigadier General Wharton was one of the cavalry commanders under Wheeler, who was supposed to slow down the Union Army. Bragg asks him, "How long can you give me?" And Wharton says about 4 days. And he's able to pretty much live up to that word. He slows them down for about 3 or 4 days until Bragg can get his men entrenched and set up. Now, on December 30th, not before the day before the battle, both army commanders lay out their battle plans. Bragg is expecting an attack the next day. He thinks Rosecrans is going to attack him, so he wants to go on the initiative. He wants to attack first. His plan is to attack the Union right flank, smash it, cut around behind the Union Army, cut them off from Nashville, and then sandwich them between the two halves of his army. That's the plan. It's a good plan. What he didn't know was that Rosecrans was planning the exact same thing. He was going to attack the Union right, smash it, cut him off from Murfreesboro, and trap him in between the two halves of their army. They actually had the same exact plan, going to affect the different ends of the line. So it simply came down to who was going to attack first. And it's a unique situation, to say the least. Again, Bragg did not have to attack. Rosecrans could have been the aggressor in this, but Bragg is going to issue his orders to attack at dawn. One reason that Rosecrans does not get his attack going is because the troops he has designated to make that flanking move have to cross a river. It's going to take about an hour in the morning to cross the river. So his plan is probably going to attack around 7 o'clock in the morning. Bragg is going to attack at 6. So that's what the two generals formulate on December 30th. Now, there is actually a battle that takes place on December 30th. Yes, there is some musketry and fire, but one of the more famous battles that happens on the 30th is actually a battle of music. The Union soldiers, their bands start playing Hail Columbia and Yankee Doodle. And when the Confederates hear this, they start playing Dixie and the Bonnie Blue Flag.
Wow.
By the end, both sides are playing the exact same song, and it's Home Sweet Home. There's talk of soldiers crying because they literally are thinking about home, and having these two sides battling one another in music and then coming together at the very end, playing the exact same song, singing the same song. Both sides are singing the words as well. It's not just playing them. It's a really special moment in Civil War history when these two sides kind of come together. It's kind of like when we usually think of that at Fredericksburg, when the two armies are kind of camped out after the battle, called fairly in close proximity. They're trading goods back and forth. It happens throughout the entire war, but this is another moment of the two sides coming together in the middle of the conflict, not in a violent sense, but in almost a camaraderie and an understanding of both sides. It's beautiful. Now, the battle on December 31st is when the battle takes place, or when the battle begins. 6 a.m. occurs. Bragg attacks first. He attacks at dawn. He has moved parts of Hardee's corps across the river, and his intention is to completely destroy the Union right flank using 2 divisions. It's about 11,000 men. It's the divisions under General McCown and General Claiborne. McCown's in front, Claiborne's behind him in support. The intention is to catch them off guard, bust up the line, and then swing to the right. Once you swing to the right, then they're going to come in behind the Union forces. So that's the plan. 6 o'clock happens. The Union are caught completely off guard. They have not dug in. That's a partial ineptness on the division commander, General Johnson, who is supposed to control the far right end of the line. He does not tell his men to do so. McCown's men hit the Union right flank they just obliterate it. It's when you hear the stories of the soldiers, it's like it dissolves like snow before the sun. I mean, it's amazing attack. It looks beautiful for the Confederacy, very successful. The problem is, instead of cutting to the right, McCown's men keep going west.
Oh, wow.
This is where the serious problem occurs. So Bragg has actually formulated a great plan. It's worked initially. Within 30 minutes, the line has already been broken. The Union line has already been broken. But McCown's men go further and further to the west.
Oh, wow.
Cleburne behind him sees this happening. Cleburne does not go behind McCown. He can't. He sees there's a big gap in the Confederate line, and so he swings his brigades into that gap. And so the Confederate line has extended even longer, but it does not have the punching power that it had initially. And this is going to be the problem that continues to roll, is because now the power is gone, and now it's going to be drawn out fights. The only good thing that comes out of this is that because the line is extended so far, they're able to get around the flank of these Union forces and force them back. But it's a hard and bloody fight. And so the Confederate line comes around. The first big stiff resistance that comes is when General Loomis's brigade attacks the Union line. He attacks the brigade of I think he's a current Brigadier General Woodruff's brigade. So Loomis and Woodruff's brigade collide, and an artillery shell strikes a tree, and the tree falls on General Loomis. It doesn't kill him, but it wounds him. His line pulls back, and they don't go back into the fight, but there's more Confederates coming up. And so that's some of the first resistance that we see, is General Loomis's men getting pushed back and him getting wounded. And when your commander goes down, that kind of, it doesn't, your line falls apart because you have no cohesion. But because that Confederate line is so long, it keeps extending. I mean, it keeps on curling towards the right. Eventually, it doesn't have the power it did at the beginning, but it still keeps cutting around. And so we see the Union lines just start to dissolve all the way back. And one of the more aggressively standoff points is what becomes known as the slaughter pens. If you've never been to Stones River, unfortunately, it's a very small battlefield, preserve-wise, because the city of Murfreesboro has grown up around it. It's a much bigger battlefield than the park encapsulates. But they do have the section that was the slaughter pen. And the slaughter pen is a unique geological area, because it's these limestone areas that have been carved away. And so in these little crevices, an entire man can, some of them, a smaller man could stand up in them. A man my size, about 5'11", could get on one knee and be completely concealed. And so they are in this pine thicket inside of these rocks, and they're able to hold off a lot of the Confederate attacks that day. But because there are many of these men that are defending this limestone outcropping, it was from Chicago, and where you had these slaughter pens from all the meat industry at the time, and they named it the slaughter pen because once the Confederates had killed so many Union soldiers, it looked like a slaughter pen.
Was it like anything like Spotsylvania and the breakthrough?
In what way?
Like, I mean, on a smaller scale, because that was basically a 17-hour hand-to-hand combat.
No, nothing like that. It's significantly quicker compared to the Spotsylvania breakthrough. But it is extremely deadly for the soldiers in it. Eventually, the Confederates are launching numerous assaults against the slaughter pen. They eventually pushed those soldiers back, and the Union line has went back and formed almost a V. It started out as roughly a straight line, and now it's went all the way into a V, a very tight V. And the Union soldiers are guarding the Nashville Pike. It's their route of escape if all else fails, and it's coming very, very close to having to be used. The one location that gets taken over back and forth is a place called the Round Forest. So many men die from one particular regiment in that area, that many of them are buried there as kind of a monument into itself. And there is a monument there on the battlefield for that. But it's the Round Forest. It's some of it's been destroyed because of city buildup, but they still have a marker there, and they call it Hell's Half Acre right in front of that. It was a miserable experience. General Polk's men fought back and forth for the Round Forest against the Union forces there. Eventually, both sides, partially because it's starting to get dark, but most fighting dies down by about 4 o'clock. I mean, both sides are exhausted. They've been fighting since 6 o'clock that morning. And so there's just no more will to do that. So that happens on December 31st.
Sorry.
January 1st, so the New Year's Day, nobody really, there's a few skirmishes, but there's no fighting. Most of the day is used to take in the wounded and simply prepare for what's going to happen the next day. Now, Bragg has caved in the Union right flank. His idea is he's going to cave in the Union left flank now. The problem is his men, well, the Union Army has crossed the river, so there's part of the Union Army is across the river, part of it's not, and they're using a ford called McFadden's Ford, and the Union have this really high ground on the north side of the river. It's a beautiful location, and you can still go there. It's part of the National Park Service today. They assemble about 50 cannons on top of that hill, and Breckinridge's division is supposed to make this attack. Once the attack starts on January 2nd, once they get within artillery range, the chaos and the loud booming of the cannons, it's probably one of the most destructive artillery fires of the entire Civil War. Although some Confederate units actually make it to the Union line, many are unable to do so. I mean, it's just that destructive.
Compare it to the barrage at Gettysburg.
Yeah, I mean, the barrage at Gettysburg, I don't think it has the effectiveness that this does. It obliterates some units. It's a sad situation for the Confederates. Some soldiers described it as one of the most scary moments of their entire Civil War career. One funny story that comes out of this, and Shelby Foote tells this story, but I think he tells the wrong location. He says this happens at Gettysburg. This one actually happens at Stones River, from what I'm aware of. The cannons go off, and there's when the cannons go off, it scares up a rabbit, and there's a dog on the battlefield, and the dog starts chasing after the rabbit, and one of the soldiers from Kentucky says, "Run, Cottontail, run. If I had no more reputation than you, I'd run too." Neat little story. Again, Shelby Foote tells that story, but I think he says it's at Gettysburg, but from numerous sources, it actually was here at Stones River. But Breckinridge's division is, if the artillery didn't get them, the Union's troops that are on that side of the river take care of the rest. There are some Kentuckians and some other units that actually make it across Stones River, but there's no way they can attack that those heights. It was just it would have been murder if they'd have even attempted it. They get across the river, do a little bit of fighting on the other side, but most of them have to pull back. And this is where Breckinridge famously says, "My orphans, my poor orphans." He's referring to the Kentuckians that he led into battle because they couldn't go back to their home of Kentucky because Kentucky was a Union state, and so they were orphans. And my orphans, my poor orphans, is what he said. And so that ends the Battle of Stones River. It's even though the units, we get, I think we take the Civil War numbers for granted sometimes because we get to Gettysburg where there's 70 and 90,000 soldiers on the field. At Stones River, there's a little bit over 40,000 Union soldiers and about 35,000 Confederate soldiers. But when you look at the numbers, it's about 23,000 casualties, nearly 13,000 for the Union and almost 12,000 for the Confederacy.
That sounds like the most brutal fights that I've read about or heard of during this.
Yeah, it truly was one of the most brutal fights of the American Civil War, as far as carnage is concerned. When you look at those numbers, the Union lose a quarter of their troops, killed, wounded, and captured. The Confederacy loses a third of their force. A third. 35,000 men, they lose about almost 12,000 of those. It's about a third of those men. I mean, that is a brutal fight. One of the soldiers described the fighting that was done at Stones River. He said it was a Union soldier. It said it sounded like Niagara Falls. The artillery fire, the musket fire sounded like a constant roar. It never stopped. That musketry never stopped. It was just a constant roar and bullets flying all around you. That humbles me. It makes cold chills run over me when I heard that description, that it sounded like Niagara Falls, that constant roar of gunfire.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I mean, and I'm not one of these guys going to sit here. Oh, there I was pinned down at Fallujah. The little bit of stuff that I seen, which was minor, and thank God, because I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm the brave macho guy. I really didn't want to get into a firefight. When I went to Afghanistan and I went to the Middle East, I was prepared for it, but I didn't want to see the death and destruction. I can't imagine what that would be like witnessing that.
Yeah. I've told you before on our shows that my focus is I got turned on to the Western theater when I took Dr. Earl Hess's Civil War class for my undergrad. And when I took his Civil War class and he talked about the Western theater, he explained it like this. The bloodiest battles of the Civil War were actually in the West. Not in far as numbers, like at Gettysburg, you lose 53,000 men. For instance, at Stones River, it is, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but in proportion to army size, it is the most bloody battle of the Civil War, one of the most bloodiest battles of the Civil War, more so than Gettysburg to some extent, just by sheer numbers in proportion to the actual army size. I mean, and that tells you how destructive that one battle was.
Takeaway from that battle, I mean, did that forever demoralize what pride the Army of the Tennessee for the Confederacy had left?
No. The Army. There's a great book.
They seem like after defeat, they never lost their will.
They didn't until after Franklin. Apparently, there's a great historian, Dr. Clampett. He wrote a good book about the final year of the Confederacy militarily, and he points toward Franklin and Nashville as being, but more so Franklin as being the point in which the Confederates themselves, like the citizens, and both the soldiers saw it as, well, this is it. We can't do anymore. That's when they finally get demoralized.
Hypothetical. And, a lot of people don't like these. Lee was a man. He was a soldier. He followed orders. What if Davis gave him the order, "You're going west"? How do you think he would have done commanding that army?
Well, I answered that question in one of my videos, a couple of weeks ago. You know, what would have happened if Lee would have went west and took the Army of Tennessee? And I had one of my commenters actually give a pretty good answer. He would have marched it into Virginia. Most likely, yes. He probably would have. He loved Virginia, and that's actually he actually suggested more troops come to him. For one reason, it's defending Virginia, but another reason, it's defending the capital. What I said in my video was it would be a lot more of an aggressive style than we would have seen with Bragg. And Bragg fought a fairly aggressive style, but he did not have the maneuvers that Lee did. Lee was one of the best when it came to maneuvering an army where it needed to go and how it needed to do it. We can look no further than both of his invasions of the North were masterfully done. The Gettysburg campaign was wonderfully done. I mean, he was had his army up and gone nearly before Hooker even knew what was happening. So you're going to have a more aggressive style, and they're going to be maneuvering a lot faster. And Lee, what he loves to do is to draw a Union army out and defeat it in detail. And when it comes to Stones River, I think he would have done something similar to Bragg. In this case, because the Union Army has pulled away. He had about 80,000 men in Nashville, pulls 40,000 out to go after Bragg. That's the perfect location that Lee would have taken advantage of and done something similar. I won't say it's exact, but he would have done something similar to what Bragg did at Stones River.
What do you think he would have done at Lookout Mountain? I don't see him just sitting there.
No. Again, he would have had a very aggressive style, and he would have, if he would have had Stonewall Jackson with him, he would have pushed George Thomas into the river, or at least tried to. I don't know if he'd have succeeded as much. Again, I told you that a desperate soldier is a dangerous one, and he definitely would have tried it.
You know, and one thing is amazing about Lee, everything I've read about him, the personality of a man, his demeanor, is almost the exact opposite of him as a commander. I mean, because he's so reserved, didn't like confrontation, didn't like argumentation, but then it would be so aggressive.
Yeah, he knew when to fight for the most part, he knew when to fight a defensive war, and he knew when to fight an aggressive war. Yeah, go ahead.
And that a lot of people, and I think I consider them my lost causers, but they say Robert Duvall, and I'm like, no. Anybody who's read anything about Lee, Martin Sheen nailed that character all the way down to when Longstreet was arguing with him on day one about redeploying, and he looked at him, and you could see the anger in his eyes, and that was the look that Lee would give to a key.
Yeah, Lee is he's a lot more aggressive in personality than I think people realize. Robert Duvall had a very controlled General Lee, and he was a great deal. He was, but he had a very fiery attitude at the same time. And so I think Martin Sheen really exemplifies that in his role as him. But again, if Lee would have had would have been commander in Tennessee, you would have seen a much more aggressive style. And well, you can't try to recreate it, and you only in your mind. But
and I hate you fix when I do this, but I don't really care because I think it's great. I think that football is one of the closest things to war. You got your trenches, your battle lines, and some coaches are defensive minded and some are offensive minded. It doesn't mean either one of them is bad or better than the other one. I think it just comes natural to some people as it does others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And people talk bad about Bragg. The Battle of Stones River was actually a really, if McCown's men hadn't went further west, it actually probably would have been a much better situation. And Bragg had a good idea. It was his subordinates that weren't able to function the way that he wanted them to. And so I can't be too down on Bragg. He did a fairly good job.
Do you feel, because the great Michael Phelps, God rest his soul. I love talking Gettysburg with that man. I mean, he knew Gettysburg. I don't know if you knew him. He was a guy there, and if in the first incident I had with him, he told me something, and I didn't think his numbers was right. And I said, well, I'll double check that. He said, you don't have to. I told you. I kind of laughed, and I said, okay. I said, I think I'm going to like this guy. But I mean, he knew, he was like an encyclopedia, and he would always make the statement, to understand the Civil War, you have to understand Napoleon. And when I look at the Civil War, the Napoleonic battles, you would have, tremendous casualties. And I wonder why you never seen that in the Civil War. I mean, is it because the rifled muskets and artillery were so much more deadlier as opposed to 100 yards for a musket?
Well, that's Dr. Earl Hess's entire book, The Rifled Musket and Civil War Combat. He says that no, the carnage did not come from the weaponry. The weaponry did not outpace the tactics. The musket that was used, like during the American Revolution, is effective range, 50, you're lucky to get 100 yards out of it. Most Civil War battles happened within 50 to 100 yards of one another. There's no long range battles that's occurring. And so to say that, and no soldier was trained properly of how to use that weapon. So when you fire, so if the men are not trained and the battles are not fought long distance anyway, and the guns can shoot 500,000 yards accurately, can you see someone 1,000 yards away? No. So it's a moot point, and that's his point of his book. It was if the casualty rates came from simply I think the strategy, the tactics that were used, not the weaponry from them. It was going to happen whether they had muskets or rifled muskets. It was simply the tactics and the aggressive styles that they used, those frontal assaults.
The question I'm asking is, and maybe you just answered it right there, is why did we never see, an army completely destroyed like at Austerlitz or drawing a blank on some of the Napoleonic battles, but an entire army of 80,000, 90,000 men destroyed?
That's a good question. I'm actually not sure why. Although
I can't.
If you look at some of those more Napoleonic battles, is how destroyed were they? Were they able to limp back and in some reasonable fashion? I know that some of them are more destructive than others, but truly, how many actually had a battle of annihilation, that it was completely wiped out completely? Civil War battles are a little bit different, but I'm not sure exactly why. I'd have to dig a little bit deeper into that.
Because you had, there were some, like Austerlitz, 80,000 men. Now, granted, I'm not saying 80,000 men dead, but they would be, prisoners, prisoners of war, and that type of things. But and I've just never been able to figure it out. Why? I think maybe one reason could have been cavalry was more used as opposed during the war. And I actually had a thing on tactical Thursday yesterday, and I wondered, you know, why was cavalry not used more as a breakthrough? I mean, I know they could fire longer rifles, but it took 2 or 3 minutes to reload a musket. 5,000 men charging on horseback, you're going to get a lot of men there really quick as shock troops.
Mm-hmm. Well, cavalry is something I've studied quite a bit, particularly with Civil War combat. And although you have, like, Napoleon is using cavalry, and you can use them as shock troops. However, by the time the Civil War comes around, the cavalry is mainly used for reconnaissance.
True.
You do have Nathan Bedford Forrest out there using cavalry extremely effectively in a combat role. But if you look at Jeb Stuart, most of his actions were scouting purposes, raids. You very rarely saw him go toe-to-toe with someone, and if it was other cavalry units. You get Brandy Station, for example. But it's hard to
yeah, it's a difficult question. I mean, I would love to listen to some military, strategists or military theorists talk about it. I love, I can read those guys all day long. And like the principles of war, you can still apply them today. You made one statement I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
Or the Napoleonic tactics about the Civil War, they're outdated. What kind of tactics would you change at that point? I mean,
that's what I'm wondering. When people say this, what are you going to change about the tactics that would do anything? Let's say that say one side fights in a linear battle line like they did, and let's say the other ones are in these broken masses of kind of like think of World War II or something like that. They're moving in a formation, but it's not a tight formation. You're not going to have the punching power that the battle line is going to have. If you charge, you're so disorganized. Can you really have that much impact on the battle line?
So I don't.
Yeah, I mean, you can hide behind trees a little bit easier, but again, are the numbers going to overwhelm you when you're actually fighting in a battle line's coming at you? Yeah, it's not as easy as people make it out to be.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't see how the tactics were outdated. I mean, weaponry just got, but there's no other way that you're going to be fighting, like you said, linear against a squad.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and they did fight in a loose formation as skirmishers, and guess what? The skirmishers always got pushed back by the battle lines. It's kind of how you had to fight at that point. There was no other way to do it. If you did anything else, it's more of guerrilla style warfare. But again, that's hard to effectively control areas with. I mean, control a battle with. You can control areas with it, of course, but you can't control a battle with it.
And how are you going to handle that?
Yeah.
I mean, I just that and that can be another question. I know, sorry, may not be related. I'm not going to keep much longer. I know you got to go. Where in an attack, in a brigade, where was the brigade commander positioned? Was he out in front as they portray in the movies, or was he in between the two regiments?
Well, let's take it from the division level first. With a division, so division has 2, 3, sometimes 4 brigades in one division, and I'll use Pickett's charge as an example, just because I have good knowledge of it, of how it operated. Pickett was out in front of his men for the first 500 until he got within about 500 yards of the Union line. That's how a division commander did. Once they get within, you can't stand in front of your men when they're firing. So when you deploy your men, you go behind and you organize where troops are going to. A brigade commander, again, is doing something extremely similar. They're going out in front of the battle line when you lead them, and many times as a brigade commander, you're going to move, you're going to either be on the left side of the line or the right side of the line, and then your colonel, an older high-ranking colonel might be on the other side. That way you can have nice coverage depending on how big the battle line is.
Armistead.
But once you go in, but once you get within rifle range, you have to move behind, because again, you can't be in front of your men when they're firing.
Okay, so Armistead at the fence. The story is that he puts his hat on his sword so his men can follow him. So he was not out front.
He was out front, yes.
So Armistead, he was not supposed to be out front, but he took it on himself to lead from the front at that point.
Well, it's different when you're. They were not stopping to fire, and
Gotcha.
so if you're not stopping to fire, there's no reason to move behind the line. So you need to keep. So so the brigade commander will be in front as long as you're advancing. But as soon as you stop and you're going to exchange rifle fire, then you move behind.
Okay.
And you perform the same duty you do for the regiments as the division commander does for the brigades. You're simply behind the lines trying to organize where regiments, where your reserve goes if a breakthrough happens, and sending messages to the higher ups.
2 parts I wish they had not cut out of that movie, and I know that it's so long, and because Trimble had actually written this years later, but they showed him at the fence and tell him, if the men I have the honor of command these days cannot take that position, all hell can't take it. And the other one is when Lee was talking to Early, Ewell, General Hill, and I forgot the other one was. That left people not knowing what they were talking about the next day about moving around to the right. That should have not been cut out of the movie.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
I've kept you a long time. Man, I tell you, I love these so much. I hope you enjoy it half as much as I do.
No, I had a blast. I love talking Stones River. It's one of my favorite battles to discuss.
So when's your first book coming out?
Hopefully soon. Hopefully in the next year at least. But it just depends on if I can find a publisher.
Now, any hints on what it's going to be? I mean, I know you.
It's just going to be the dissertation turned into a book, so won't have to write anything new. Thank goodness.
So, for your first battle, what's it going to be?
Well, we already discussed what the dissertation is. The first battle I actually talk about is the first battle of Cumberland Gap, so March of 1862. Small, quick little battle, but it's and I've got an animated battle map of it on my channel. It's a neat little battle. So nothing. No. I don't discuss any giant battles.
You've got something, and I love because I try to do these too. Sometimes it's just so hard for us to get it in. But you do the videos perfect. I try to tell people all the time, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 minutes. Is usually all you're going to hold people's attention. You'd be surprised at how long people watch these videos right here. I mean, sometimes 40 minutes.
Oh, I know. I'm always surprised. I try to do short ones. People request for long ones, but I'm a little hesitant, and plus it takes me a long time to edit it all together, because I put in all the different images and all the back and the what's it called, the panning and the going in and out, and so it takes me a while. An 8-minute video takes me like 2 hours to edit.
Yeah, and hopefully I'm going to check when I get on this laptop. They says it's supposed to have editing on it. We'll see. If not, I'm going to get that thing that you tell me about and buy it. If you, I don't know if you ever did this, but one day, if you get a chance, I got a request for the Battle of Tuscaloosa, where the cadets defended the university.
Okay, I will do a little research and try to put something like that together.
Did you want to do the Christmas thing next time?
Yeah, yeah, we can. I'm actually going to be tomorrow. I'm portraying Jeb Stewart at a colonial Christmas, but they still want some Civil War soldiers there, and I'm going to be talking about uh, Jeb Stewart's Christmas, and so I can talk about his Christmas. I can talk about a few of just the regular soldiers' Christmases as well, if you want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to videotape that, we can put that up too.
I might do that. I'm gonna see how everything goes tomorrow.
I mean, I know it's Christmas time and you're busy, and I don't want to tack up, your time trying to come up with a video to do. Because how many videos have you actually produced?
Oh gosh, I've got 250, 300 now, I think.
First one I ever watched was Picket on Pickett's Charge. And then I remember in the Killer Angels in there one day, and I was talking about it, and I said, "Man, have you ever watched that guy Lucas Wilder?" And he said, "I'm Lucas Wilder." And I said, and you said, "No." I was like, "Oh my God, dude, you are so awesome."
I remember that.
I was like a schoolgirl crushing. I mean, because they come up. I mean, we had a thing the other night. I don't know if I told you about it, but it was Longstreet slow on the second day, and I put your video up, and one guy said, "Poor James Longstreet." I said, "No, not poor James Longstreet. I don't know why that y'all think that he cannot be criticized." I said, "But he, can be criticized just like any other general can." And I had to crack.
I'll criticize anyone. I even criticized Lee. It's like he made some big mistakes.
I do too. I mean, I have to. I cracked down the other days. I was getting so sick of this stuff. I had a 60-day ban. But if somebody puts up a post that is not acceptable, report it. Don't comment back, because I'm looking at it now as like the guy who when two linemen push each other, the second guy pushes and he gets the flag thrown on him. Mm-hmm. I mean, because I'm just sick of these guys fighting over stupid shit. But anyway, I loved it. I'll get this edited, and thanks again as always. And I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
That sounds great, buddy. I look forward to it.
Man, thanks.
Okay. Bye.